23%. That's how much of the world's GDP India accounted for at one point in history. By 1947, that number has fallen to just 1.8%. Indian politician, author, public intellectual, and diplomat Shashi Tharoor has once often argued that the wealth of British Empire came at an enormous cost to India. But beyond the numbers lies another question. If India was once so-called wealthy, where did that wealth actually go? What happened to the priceless jewels, manuscripts, thrones, textiles, and works of the art that once filled the Mughal courts? Were they looted, sold, gifted, or are they simply preserved in museums thousands of miles away? Hello everyone, I'm Akanksha and welcome back to Flashback Friday Season 2 presented by Art with Abir. Today, we are not stepping into a museum, we are following a trail of objects, from the courts of the Mughals to auction houses, private collections, and museums across the world. The Mughal court was one of the richest in the early modern world, but its wealth was not just about gold. It was about objects crafted with extraordinary skill and meaning. Jeweled daggers with jade hills inlaid with rubies and emeralds, miniature paintings that recorded court life, battles, and intimate moments, carpets, textiles, manuscripts, and calligraphy that blended Persian, Central Asian, and Indian aesthetics. And then, of course, there were legendary objects like the Peacock Throne, commissioned by Shah Jahan, said to be covered in diamond, pearls, and precious stones. These were not just luxury items, they were the symbols of power, legitimacy, and empire. So, how did these objects leave the subcontinent? The story is not a single event, it is a long, layered process. One of the earliest major ruptures came in 1739 when the Persian ruler Nader Shah invaded Delhi. He looted the Mughal treasury, taking him the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. But the more sustained dispersal happened later, under British colonial rule. After the decline of the Mughal Empire, especially following the Revolt of 1857, the British East India Company and later the Crown took control of vast territories. Royal treasuries were seized, palaces were emptied, objects were collected as war body, diplomatic gifts, or administrative acquisitions. Some were shipped to Britain as symbols of imperial victory. Others entered private collections of officers, scholars, and traders, and many eventually made their way into museums. So, was this all looting, or is the story more complicated? It is both, and that tension is important. There were undeniable acts of violent extraction. After 1857, the British dismantled the Mughal court. Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled, and Delhi's cultural ecosystem was devastated. Objects were taken in the aftermath of the conflict, often without consent. But there were also other pathways. Some artifacts were sold by Indian elites during times of political instability. Some were commissioned by British patrons from Indian artisans. Others were collected by scholars who saw themselves as preserving history. So while loot is powerful and often accurate word, it does not capture the full complexity of how objects move. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London holds an extensive collection of Mughal decorative arts, from jade objects to textiles. The British Museum houses manuscripts, paintings, and artifacts that link to the Mughal court. The Royal Collection Trust includes items collected by British monarchs during the colonial period. The Koh-i-Noor diamond is a part of British Crown jewels, but Mughal objects are not only in the UK. They are in the museums and collections across Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. And importantly, many remain in India. Institutions like the National Museum in Delhi, the Salar Museum in Hyderabad, and the various regional collections hold significant Mughal works. Here is a difficult question. Have some of these objects survived because they were left? Some argue that certain artifacts were preserved precisely because they entered museum system with controlled environment, conservation practices, and documentation. But this argument is not neutral because preservation cannot be separated from the conditions under which these objects were taken. To say something was saved can sometimes obscure the fact that it was also removed from its cultural context, its language, its landscape, its people. An object in a glass case in London is not the same as an object in the court, shrine, or city it was made for. So today, the question is not just where are they, it is also where should they be. Recent years, debates around restitution have intensified. Should museums return objects taken during colonial rule? What counts as rightful ownership after centuries? And how do we balance global access with local belonging? Some institutions have begun returning artifacts, others resist, arguing that encyclopedic museums serve a global public. Meanwhile, digital archives and traveling exhibitions are emerging as partial solutions, allowing wider access without physical return. But for many, these are not enough, because this is not just about objects. It is about history, dignity, and the right to tell one's own story. Where does this leave us? The Mughal treasuries are not lost, but they are not fully found either. Because the journey of these treasuries did not end when they left the Mughal court. It continues in museums, in politics, and in conversations like this one. This was Flashback Friday with Art with Habib. See you next week, where another story from the past helps us understand the world we see today.